Hello, everyone, and welcome to Do Me a Favor, Open the Door and Let Them In, including external participants in PS Workflow. We are joined by our friends at Gideon Taylor. My name is Scott Lavery, and I am the head of marketing here at Appsian, and I would like to welcome everybody to the last session for the PeopleSoft Innovation Summit. It's been a busy couple of days. We're thoroughly exhausted, but we're happy that everyone is able to join us. Just before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. Everyone is on mute and the session is being recorded. We'll be sure to post that to PSFTSummit.com along with YouTube probably next week. The session will be 60 minutes in length, so we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. So if any questions do come up, we ask that you put those in the questions section of the control panel, and we'll be sure to get to them at the end of the presentation. So with that, I'd like to turn things over to Paul to begin today's presentation. Paul?
Thank you. Glad to be here. Again, I'm Paul Taylor, President and CEO at Gideon Taylor, and I'm joined by Patrick Hagen, who's the Director of Global Accounting Program. Oh boy, is that all one title? He's the Director and Manager of Financial Systems with the Global Accounting Program at Prologis. And we're going to be talking about a solution that we did together there. So glad to have him with us. So we're talking here about including external participants in PeopleSoft workflow and really including them in PeopleSoft, period. In most cases, these solutions are ways to get somebody into PeopleSoft that were not able to get into PeopleSoft before. So that's what we'll be talking about. We'll just a brief agenda here. You just got the welcome and introductions. I'm going to show you just a couple more shameless plug slides about GT, and then we'll get into talking about really how we got to where we are in terms of business systems and wanting to include more and more people in the core business system processes. We'll talk about some of the objectives for including external participants. I may end up using the shortcut phrase expat just because that's a lot shorter than external participants. And then Patrick will go over basically the solution that we have in place there at Prologis for vendor authorization. I'll pick up afterwards and go over some of the pieces that we pulled together in order to create the solution. And then we'll also review some other implementations. One of the interesting things we've seen as we've been doing these external participant implementations is that no two are alike. And so some flexibility is needed and some creativity. Hopefully you'll be able to follow and think of ways that you could include your external participants appropriately in PeopleSoft. We'll try to save some time for question and answer at the end, so feel free to drop things in the chat, and we'll try to pick them up at the end. If Scott sees something drop in that he thinks we really should answer in line, he'll interrupt and let us know. Scott Anton is kind of our ghost presenter who's here with us, and he'll help moderate the Q&A as well. Okay, so we are Gideon Taylor. We've enjoyed a long and happy partnership with Appsian, and I hope that you've all enjoyed the conference so far, and grateful to them for including us and putting everything together. We are based in lovely Pleasant Grove, Utah. Actually, our headquarters is just across the city line in American Fork, but I'm in Pleasant Grove right now, so we'll count it. We consider ourselves a PeopleSoft custom solutions provider for PeopleSoft organizations, and that means that we work to revolutionize the business processes that are the heart and soul of your organizations. Our goal is to end up helping our clients work more effectively, more efficiently, more flexibly, more simply, and not necessarily in that order. We are an Oracle partner, and the solutions that we provide our product, specifically GT eForms, is an Oracle validated integration. We also provide consulting services, and those consulting services focus on automation technologies, both our own technology and PeopleSoft's delivered technology. So if you need help with anything having to do with automating business processes, we'd love for you to give us a call. A few of our clients, just a small sampling. You see we do a lot of higher ed and government work and plenty of industry retail work as well. And happy to have Prologis among our hopefully happy clients. We'll see if Patrick's, that was it was a smile, that counts. We'll go with that. So again, just a brief history of business systems. And please don't be blown away by my awesome automation here, but it should suffice. So in the beginning, there were core systems. So back in the day, when business systems first came to life about 50 years ago, it was all about just the core system users, the people in the business offices who worked on the computer and plugged data into it and got reports out of it on green bar, and that was it. No one else really saw the business systems. So then somewhere around, really came into its own in the 90s, you get this idea of this additional layer onto the business system for self-service. Oh, going too fast. So self-service users would include in HR, of course, your employees. It can include in financials. The example that we'll be looking at here is vendors. But really people who interact with your organization and need to be able to take care of their own transactions. So we added this layer on, and of course, authentication may be somewhat different for them, but they still need to be authenticated because they need to be able to see just their own information and need to make sure that no one else can see their information. And now, then on top of that, we add, and this really came into its own in the early 2000s, the public layer. So we started to see, you know what, we've got all this awesome data and all of this great power in our core business systems in PeopleSoft, for example. We want to be able to engage people outside of the organization in these processes for whatever reason. And so you have this opportunity to engage people who don't necessarily need to start authenticated. But you also can have processes that flow between layers that may start public, but then need to end up self-service, or may start in the core system, but need to flow out to self-service users, or even to external participants. So that flow back and forth is really where workflow comes in. So some examples then here in the core system, that could be, I think I'm still playing here. Oh, lost it. There we go. So the core system, and an example of that in HR would be job data. You don't want anyone to see that directly, but then you have self-service example like my pay stub, and then public facing, you could have the ability to apply for a job. So, and we've been doing this public facing stuff for a long time in PeopleSoft. In HCM, for example, eRecruit has been out there forever. That really is hosted on a public portal and people interact with it through the guest user. So expanding the power of PeopleSoft to reach other audiences is really what we're going to be talking about here today. So here are a few reasons that you might want to do that. We'll just bring them up all at once. In involving those external participants, you may want to be gathering electronic signatures on electronic forms. You may want for them to, and if you think about your business processes and where they actually start, a lot of PeopleSoft business processes don't really start with PeopleSoft. They start with someone filling out a form someplace. And that may be a PDF, it may actually still be a piece of paper, it might be a third-party application, it might be a home-built web page or web form, but collecting valid signatures on the transaction from people outside the organization can be one of the main reasons you want to do this. You also may want, along the process of that flow, to be able to clearly identify who it was and that participated in the transaction, who owns it, and who did what. You want to get rid of paper, you want to get rid of administrative overhead, you want to get rid of dual entry of data, you want to get rid of manual security tasks. Once you start talking about external participants, usually system admins and security people at that point say, no, we're not going to manually set up user IDs for all of these external participants, so you better figure something out. So that's one of the things we have to accomplish, is to make sure that we get appropriate security without having manual tasks. We want to end up being able to leverage PeopleSoft's AWE or approval framework transactions so that we can actually have a record of completed workflow. And you want to end up with queryable data inside of PeopleSoft. One of the great things about PeopleSoft is that, again, all the important data is in one place. And this data, whatever information you're sharing back and forth, collecting from external participants, you want to be able to run queries that include or combine that data with your internal data. And then you may want to establish ongoing access. So you may be engaged with the person on the outside shell in that public shell to begin with, but you may want to set up a gate for them into the self-service space so that they do have ongoing access after the initial interaction. So all of those things are things that can be accomplished with an external participant facing process. And to give us a real world example here, I'm going to hand things off to Patrick. And again, Patrick and I worked together on this solution here just recently in the past couple of months. And so he's got a good story to tell. I will turn it over to you, and I'm going to give you control of my screen, so you should be good to go.
Thanks, Paul, and I appreciate you saying that we did this together. I think I gave you a lot of requirements, and then you did a lot of things along with some of our technical team members and your technical team members. So it was a great project. To your earlier comment on if we're a happy customer, and executed very nicely. So a little bit about me and more importantly Prologis. So as Paul said, I run what we call our financial applications team. So from the business side, the non-technical side, we kind of operate a series of financial applications at Prologis, the most important of which, at least to me, would be PeopleSoft financials. So Prologis itself, a little bit about us. We are the world's leader and largest logistics real estate investment trust. So we own, as you can see, a couple of stats here. We own just over 4,700 buildings at the moment. So those are primarily last touch real estate for think about all the warehouses that things like Amazon packages and online e-commerce goes through. We build a lot of build to suit buildings for specific customers to fit their needs, but we're really focused on owning real estate that is near consumers and in scarce real estate markets. So we have about 148 billion assets under management, about 3.1 billion in annual net operating income. We are just about to hit a billion there, but 984 million square feet of building space. We have 5,500 wonderful customers, and I always think it's, a lot of people don't know about Prologis. So we always like to say, we're one of the biggest companies that no one knows about. That right around 2.5% of the world's GDP goes through one of our warehouses when it's bought or sold. So, but we do operate in 19 countries across Americas, Europe, and Asia. And we'll get into a little bit about how that played into some of our requirements here with GT Forms. But we have about 1,700 employees worldwide, and so a little bit about our PeopleSoft environment. I guess we are on PeopleSoft 9.2. Of course, we are in image 34, tools 857. We are just about to kick off this year's image update to move us to 39 and 858. So we have a fairly straightforward plan to typically do an upgrade once a year or an update once a year. We've been on PeopleSoft, a single global instance of PeopleSoft for about 18 years, and a total PeopleSoft customer for probably another 5 or 6 after that, so maybe 25-ish total years on PeopleSoft. We're a fairly complex organization. I always like to tell people one of our fun facts about PeopleSoft right now is, I don't know if it's fun, but it's we have right around 5,000 legal entities. Because we're a real estate investment trust, we do need to maintain all those legal entities, which makes all things very fun in PeopleSoft. So that's just a little bit of highlight of kind of our company and our PeopleSoft footprint. I guess our primary modules that we use in PeopleSoft are AP, purchasing, the general ledger, of course, for full consolidation of all international financials, project costing, our primary modules, and expenses, of course. We only use AR for intercompany, and otherwise our AR is all in another financial application that is based on real estate called Yardi that we interface in accounts receivable. So a couple highlights about us, but going into kind of the reason that we've been a customer of GT for about 1.5 years, I think, and one of the reasons we, of course, like this solution is that we're generally very able to build our own forms and create our own, automate our own processes, and without going into too much technical work. But we this year, or I guess last year, I'm sorry, in 2020, we implemented a part of PeopleSoft that I'm not sure if lots of people have implemented yet, but it's the PeopleSoft Supplier Portal. So this is deliver PeopleSoft technology. I think if you, depending on what you own around ePro and purchasing, you probably own some parts of this portal in your PeopleSoft footprint. But it's a place in PeopleSoft that actually allows your vendors to log in, or I'm sorry, we have to call them suppliers now, according to PeopleSoft, right? So we allow our suppliers to log in, and they can do lots of things. If they're a new supplier, they can register themselves, right? Enter their W-9, enter all their details, give us their bank account information. If they're an existing supplier, they can log in and see the payments, the status of their invoices, see their payment statuses, look at their purchase orders, and do a series of other things. But we actually implemented this portal late last year, and as we were going live with it, we spoke with some of our leadership, especially around security. As I'm sure many of you know, in 2020, fraudulent attempts on bank accounts and financial systems were through the roof, right? Apparently lots of people had free time, and they were using that to try to dupe people into providing their bank accounts to the wrong places. So we had just implemented the portal. We were also getting rid of an outsourced ACH provider, which meant here in the US, which we were moving to storing our vendors' bank accounts in our system instead of an outsourced system. And that, therefore, of course, we needed to gather and securely maintain that information. So meeting with our leadership, they asked us to essentially provide a way in which we could work with our suppliers, which to put that in perspective, I think we have just over 20,000 active suppliers at Prologis worldwide, work with our suppliers to ensure that we were inviting the right people to the portal, right? The people that we were inviting were going to be the people who were supposed to be invited, that had access to the information we were asking them to provide us, and that our main contacts at that vendor wanted them to be invited, right? And wanted them to have access to that information. And we started that discussion with some people suggesting that we create a form that we could email to them and they could sign it and send it back to us, and which sounded like a paper form that we were going to end up having to maintain. And many of us were not super interested in that. So we, like I said, had already been a customer of GT, and we had built some forms, but had kind of this idea of and goals that you'll see below to build this form that would allow us to gather this information, but we weren't sure that we could do it, right? That we could invite people who ultimately were not going to have access to our system long term. They were actually people who were going to provide us the names and contact information of other people who would have long-term access to our systems. So I'm going to get into the details of the solution a little bit, but we had, just to go over some of our goals. Number one goal was security, right? We couldn't build some digital form that wasn't secure, and the whole point of doing the form was to make sure we were getting secure information. So that was our first and foremost, and I think Paul spoke directly to our C-suite about the security that could be employed. We needed a simple way to initiate the process, right? This form we wanted to send out, we didn't want to make it cumbersome for our business users, the ones who have these vendor relationships, to initiate it. So it needed to be easy to use and intuitive. So we wanted to, those of you who have built PeopleSoft forms before, one of the biggest drawbacks to them is that you can't put inline instructions, right? And you can't make the form change and morph based on previous selections. So again, just a general reason to use GT forms are those things, and especially when you're starting to include people who aren't familiar with your PeopleSoft environment, aren't familiar with your end goals. It's really nice when you can guide them along the process using validations and if-then statements in the form. So we wanted to eliminate dual entry. So some of the things that we gather up front on the form also needed to be on the vendor, right? So think about, we were gathering who we should send a purchase order to, or what person was allowed to edit banking. Well, those are contacts on the supplier profile in PeopleSoft. So we didn't want to write them on a form only to have to rekey them onto the supplier profile. So we wanted to automate that process, and we'll talk more about that. We needed to have dynamic workflow based on going to these external contacts that were, say, what we'll call guest users, and I think Paul will use his technical knowledge to explain more what that means later. But we wanted to be able to include them, and then based on what they filled out, include some Prologis employees and route to people's managers based on different criteria. So we wanted to be able to do the workflow and use AWE. We also wanted to update the supplier profile, so whether that be the email address we're supposed to send purchase orders, or as I already said, the contacts, we wanted to update all of that, but we didn't want to have to put the vendor unapproved status just because we added my name as a contact, right? So we worked with the team to make sure we could do that. And then the Supplier Portal has a delivered functionality where you send people invitations with access codes, and but the pages in which you do that are less than friendly. There's a lot of steps. It's a few steps just to kind of pick the right email template you want to use, and pick the right region and the right language, and include all the right content. And so we wanted to automate that step just because it was very cumbersome for our users. And then the bane of my existence, the biggest part, or what ended up being one of the biggest parts about this, was that being a global company, we actually generally for employees have a policy that all of our employees in accounting that use our systems globally, the systems are in English. We don't use PeopleSoft multi-language. typically. But because now we're inviting a bunch of suppliers to log into our PeopleSoft environment and we're communicating with our suppliers, we had to do the pages themselves, the form, the notifications about the form, the emails, the job aids, you name it, in all of these languages. So I'm not going to say them all, but you can see a lot of languages that we need to translate all of this content in was part of the scope of this form. So Paul, did I miss anything there, or were those enough goals for you?
I think it was enough. Yeah, I might have been daunted if I saw that list before we started. But
yeah, we didn't show the whole list before we started, so that was a key to our strategy. So those were our goals, and so this is kind of a high level, and we're going to walk through this a little bit in a video in a moment, but I'll just explain kind of the order of operations, which was, we wanted to have the form start with our Prologis contact, which is our just way of saying the person at our company who knows the vendor, right? And then the part that I think this form was so useful in is doing the authorized contact is, and I'll use Paul as the example, right? Well, when we work with a company like GT, we started with, someone that we signed the contract with, and I think it was Scott at GT, and we would send this form to them to say, great, you're a new supplier for us, we're excited to work with you, and now we need to know who your AR person is, who your purchasing person is, that we can long-term invite to our portal. But that person is very rarely a person who's going to get invited to the portal, right? So that's what kind of made this a tricky situation. So we send the form to the authorized contact, and then we really were able to build workflow based on, was that a new supplier or an old supplier or an existing supplier? We also employed some robot technology in there that I'm sure Paul can tell you more about, because these forms would sit in a waiting period where we were waiting for someone to complete their step, and we didn't want to have to monitor it every day, right? So the robot does that for us. And then you can see we do all kinds of things along the lines here of adding contacts and updating supplier records and going through approvals right in the system. So we're going to walk through this in a little more detail, but this is kind of the high level. Okay. How am I doing on time, Paul?
You're doing great. You've got about 10 more minutes if you want it.
So as we said, this kind of starts out with our Prologis contact or our Prologis employee saying, hey, I want to invite a new or existing vendor to this portal so that they can self-service their own data, self-service their own information. And you can see here, one thing nice, you can all do it this way or not do it this way, which is we actually added a tile right to every employee's homepage for this form because it's so commonly used that we wanted to put it right on our employee self-service. Now, other forms we created go into kind of a global forms work center. You can see that in the bottom left. But this one is so commonly used that we put it right on the top. Let's see if this one. Oh, I think I might have started over. So we'll. Luckily we went.
It's Alt Q you want.
All right. Let's see. So once they select the form, you'll see they land on a landing page, which gives them some brief information about what we're doing. They select the add a supplier authorization eForm. Oh, I did it again. I think Alt P, right? Not Alt Q.
Oh, right. I'm sorry, my bad. Alt P.
So what you can see here is that, and this is already starting to happen, right? So the first question on the form was, are you inviting an existing supplier? And that allowed us to change the form dynamically and add the supplier lookup, right? And if you were saying no to this process, which we'll see again, then you would just type in the new supplier's name. You can also see that region is required there. And the region is actually mapped to our set IDs. So not only were we able to find out what region they were in, but then it would drive which set ID the supplier ID gets created in. Let's go. I've gotten ahead of myself here. So as you can see, you can pick a region. And if you pick a region, then if you pick a region other than the US, then you are allowed to pick a language, right? So in the US and Asia will, when we roll out with Asia, we'll predefine the language. But in these instances, if you were in Europe, you were allowed to select your language. And we also, of course, even allow English, right? So if you're, just because you're in France doesn't mean that you necessarily want all of your communications in French, but you kind of have that flexibility. So I think for ease of this purpose, we decided to stick with the United States. So in this example, we're filling in the new vendor's name, and you can see we predefined the Prologis contact. That's the user ID of the person currently logged in. It fills in their name. But if I'm filling out this form and I'm really saying, you know, Paul is really the real contact, and I want the workflow to be based off of him, I did have the ability to change that. And as you can see, we're in Denver, so we are inviting one of our favorite Denver Bronco quarterbacks here, Ben Manning, to the portal. So once we submit this, it actually is going to immediately, in that case, generate an email to that authorized contact to say, you know, and we'll see it in a moment, that they've been requested to provide us with the contact information of the people at their organization that we would like to include in our supplier portal. So this is the initial vendor registration. So I'm sure if those of you on PeopleSoft today, if you've used supplier registration within the module internally, it's the exact same process for an external participant to do that. And this is inviting them to do that. It really takes the workload off of your AP team to enter the tax ID and the company name and all that information, and allows the vendor to do it themselves. And I'm sure Paul will talk a little bit later. We decided to only allow this token to be valid for 21 days because we didn't want them to kind of leave this out there forever. And then I think if it expires, we can reissue it. But that was a decision we made. And then here you'll see what happens. As you can see, the person clicked on that link, and all of the information that the Prologis employee filled out above is visible, but it is not editable. And I'm going to pause it here and explain a little bit very quickly about what we're doing. So we're gathering a few things all at once, which was great for us. So we're finding out who is going to be responsible for doing the registration itself. So give us their bank account information, give us your W-9, give us all the information we need to set you up as a new supplier. We're then going to allow you to tell us, out of all the people you're giving us, if you want the people involved to be able to view and edit banking information. This was a kind of a new request from our organization, but it turned out we did it in kind of a cool way. So based on what you select on this form, we actually build a dynamic role within PeopleSoft to allow you to view or not view the banking once you're in the portal. And then the last type of contact there is the PO contact. And that contact, we request for just one, but what we're looking, we actually take the email address of that person and we put it right on the address location of the vendor. And then we change the payables options to, I'm sorry, the procurement options to use that email to send purchase orders to. So lots of things all at once. And there's some good validation.
Can I jump in? Yeah. Can I jump in for just 1 second there, Patrick? I'm just jumping back a little bit here to the email, because this, for the purposes of our session here, of including external participants, this is where the magic happened. So the vendor contact who does not have access to PeopleSoft gets this email. Underneath this link is a URL that is going to get them into PeopleSoft using token technology that we'll talk about here in a minute. But the fun thing is that when they click that link, this is really, I mean, they don't see the bubble transition there, but they end up right here on this form. So there's no login. They are automatically logged in, but we also know who they are. So we can pre-populate with the information and put them actually into the same form that was started on their behalf by the Prologis contact. Sorry, go ahead, Patrick.
No, great point. Definitely a big part of it. And again, they're in a secure side of PeopleSoft at that point. Just so we're gathering the information in a secure way. Let's see if I hit Alt P. Right. Okay, so I think we'll see it kind of filling things out. There's some really nice validations in here. I honestly probably can't remember them all, but if you pick registration contact, you're automatically allowed to do banking, because how else would you give it to us if you don't know it? But we make sure that there's an @ symbol in the email address, and we make sure that we don't already have that email address registered, and all of those types of things. Another thing that we did that our team asked us to is we wanted people to acknowledge that they were now responsible for updating this information and keeping it up to date, even if someone at their company left or whatever the case may be. So we asked for that acknowledgement. And then in this case, we actually did another acknowledgement that said, if you've only given us one person, we would really prefer that you give us more. And the reason being that if one person ended up doing something, getting compromised or doing something fraudulent, we actually send an email to everyone. So Gideon Taylor is a supplier in our system, and if someone goes in and changes their banking information, we actually send an email to all 3 people on Gideon Taylor's profile, and we say, hey, someone just changed your banking. Please let us know if that was, if you believe this to be fraudulent. The same way Amazon or others might alert you of something similar. So, but we did also understand, we originally had the requirement that everyone had to give us 2, but we also understand that we work with some small organizations, and maybe you're a sole proprietorship. So we do give people the ability to only give us 1, but we force them then to say, I understand that I'm kind of taking on some additional risk by only giving you 1. So once they do all of that, they're able to, so you'll see when he added the extra person, now that extra acknowledgement went away. And I think for ease purposes, we're going to not add another person, but. And then I think we're also going to show here that the PO contact, we also did a validation that we only wanted 1 PO contact because there's only 1 place to put it. So as we go, push, so select both of those and then submit the contact information. And then once they submit this contact information, it again continues the process for us. It sends the right email to the right person saying, hey, you know, Paul just filled out this form, and he said, I guess in this example, Peyton Manning just filled out this form, and he said that you would set us up as a vendor at Prologis. And that's what this email is here. And again, that whole step of sending these things automatically was really important to us because it gives the link to do the registration, it gives a link to the job aids, it took the person's name who works at Prologis and gave them that contact information. And then it also gives the contact information for our help desk in case you get stuck and you need help. And that's dynamic as well. It says it knew that this was a United States form, so it gives the United States email. So. All right, I think, so then we go through the normal process of PeopleSoft, right? So we've gotten to the point of setting up the supplier. The vendor now goes through our custom, this is actually a custom, oh, let me pause right here. So this is a custom sign-up page where people would, we do multi-factor authentication to log into the PeopleSoft Supplier Portal. This is not delivered by PeopleSoft, so we built this on Cognito on the front end, but that drove all of that automation as well. So this user is now signing up, getting their mobile device configured, and they'll confirm it and then log directly into the PeopleSoft Supplier Portal.
One of the reasons I threw all these pages on here in the video is just to point out how if you didn't have the eForm involved in this process, then that initial salesperson maybe who signed the contract, who isn't going to be managing the supplier relationship, would end up having to go through all that multi-factor authentication in order to get into the system, in order to really tell you who really needs to be in the system. So
Right.
we went through, instead, they face this eForm that they don't have to authenticate to get into. It's still, it is secure, and they're able to give us secure information, but we're not giving them much. So they're not looking up information about a supplier. They're providing information, and then we're getting it to the people who actually need to go through the multi-factor authentication setup, and we'll have the ongoing access.
Yep.
And then
Yep.
I just wanted to point this out as well. Go ahead, Patrick.
Oh, no, please.
Just the all the magic. There's a whole lot of magic that happens behind the scenes. The cool thing about eForms automation is that you have a simplified front end and then an automated back end. So we're gathering information in a simplified UI, but then behind the scenes, we're doing all kinds of crazy things in order to update the delivered PeopleSoft pages. So we have, I will just mention that GT robot line in the middle is really fun. We call her Rosie usually, but Rosie is actually a workflow user, just an automated one. And we needed to use Rosie in this case because before we got to that AP pool approval step, we wanted to make sure that the supplier ID was updated on the form, but it wasn't. But in the case of new suppliers, we didn't know what it was yet until the registration contact actually got in and created that supplier ID. So we just had Rosie hold those eForms in her own workflow queue and periodically poll the supplier IDs to see if a matching supplier ID had been created yet for the form that she was holding in her queue. And as soon as that happened, she then updates the supplier ID on the form automatically, so that by the time it gets to the real people at the AP pool, it's the supplier ID is always there.
Yeah, and that really
Sorry,
helped.
go ahead, Patrick.
Well, and that really helped us because otherwise, again, we don't like to have our employees consistently checking and checking and checking. And so this allows them to be provided the information when it's ready for them to take action, instead of, having to monitor all these forms. And as you can imagine, with 20,000 suppliers, there's lots of these forms happening. So I think that's the end of this video, right? So I think I will go to the next slide. So I'm able. I don't know if you can.
Should click through now. There you go.
There we go. All right.
Oh,
so
one too far. There we go.
So just a real quick summary of kind of how this went. So, I mean, the process itself was really great. We were honestly under quite a bit of pressure to put this in place quickly because it was for some security concerns. So we completed the form with Paul and a couple members of his team fairly quite quickly, ahead of schedule, from mid-November to mid-January, and so I think it was right around 2 weeks ahead of schedule. We executed in 2 phases. So we put the form in so that people could start using it in phase 1, and that was right in the beginning of January. And then all that magic, all the CIs, all that automation about adding contacts and such that we were just talking about, that was added about 2 to 3 weeks later, so that we could start using it, but that, and then we should do some manual steps in the beginning. But so far, I mean, this has only been in place for about a month. We've executed we've sent over 1,600 forms, inviting our new and existing suppliers to share their contact information and their company data. Over 700 of them have completed the form, and that they've provided us over 1,100 contacts. So if you think about if a person had to go put 1,100 people on supplier profiles throughout PeopleSoft, I think if I would have asked our teams to do that, I would have gotten a lot of ugly looks. So, and we just broke down one of the things that I think is really impressive here, and we didn't have this process before, so there's nothing to benchmark it against. But I think the little table below shows just how easy this process is. That, in the US, for instance, 460 of the people who have completed the form did it within 1 day of us sending it to them, right? Which is pretty indicative of them finding it simple and easy to use. So, so far so good, and we're really enjoying the efficiency that we're getting out of it.
You like the graphic we threw in here, Patrick? You get process success. Hey, yeah.
The way your team amazes me, it just never stops ending, Paul. This team is also top notch.
Awesome. Okay, with that, I'm going to take your access to my computer away and go on and finish up. So let's take a few minutes here to just do a quick tools review and go over what we use to accomplish this. So the three main tool sets that we used were first eForms, which is our bolt-on configuration-based form building tool for PeopleSoft. And part of that is our GT token technology. It's a feature that lets us use unique transactions or unique tokens to secure transactions in various ways. And it was also key to have a PeopleSoft public portal available to assist us in, and that was necessary in order to get that login free experience that the registered contact or the authorized contact had. So just a quick review of those. Again, GT eForms is it's a bolt-on for PeopleSoft. It's built completely in PeopleTools, and it's Oracle validated. It allows you to put fields on the page for a functional person to put fields on the page. It also allows a technical person to extend the behavior of those fields and to build stuff around it that you may not be able to do with config. So there's really no limit to what you can accomplish with it. But a configuration, the configuration power is really remarkable. And a lot of that dynamic behavior you saw, fields hiding and unhiding and such forth, all that's done without tech. That's able to be done with configuration-based visual ifs and smart sources, logic statements that are config-based logic engine that's built in. And you also saw pre-population of data. That's another amazing piece that a functional person can actually set up a form to pre-populate with data, can set up prompts and lookups and validation off of existing data from your PeopleSoft system. And it all happens using PeopleSoft AWE, PeopleSoft Security. It's a native application to PeopleSoft. And although we showed everything on a desktop screen here, all this could happen on a mobile device. So just a few additional features here, which I won't go into great detail on here, but we had conditional routing and conditional logic involved in this solution to take branches in workflow, depending on whether they were an existing supplier or not. We used, again, restricted prompt values. You saw all sorts of places where PeopleSoft data was being pulled in and dynamically updated based on the choices that the user was making. We want to end up having an experience that unfolds naturally to the user and to enable some creative and efficient business process design and automation. So the other tool, the GT tool, is GT tokens. And for this, I just want to go back again and look at these objectives. And a number of the objectives that we went over for involving external participants in PeopleSoft workflow are really enabled using this token technology. Because the problem you end up with when you want to bring in outside participants is PeopleSoft workflows based on user ID. So how do you involve somebody in an AWE transaction if they don't have a user ID? External participants don't have user IDs by definition. Setting them up takes a lot of manual effort. So, and if you let them in without it, then how are you going to keep them from seeing core system data that you don't want them to be able to see, or seeing someone else's transactional data? So tokens really helped us to accomplish that. The token itself acts like an invitation to participate in a specific transaction, which is how Prologis used it in this situation. They sent an email to the external participants that has a token embedded in it. That token is specific to that transaction, that eForm that was started by their Prologis contact on their behalf. And that token lets them then create, it can let them create their own self-service user ID. Now, in this case, we didn't actually do that. We had a one-step process in there where they actually set up, they identified who was going to end up with those user IDs. And so it was even a little more complex then. But the token can actually take them where they need to go. The people who are signing the transaction can do so actually with their own ID or just on the basis of the token, which is how it starts at Prologis. And so the token can accomplish a lot of things in order to be a bridge between that public space and the self-service space that they're actually going to end up in. What is a token? It is not a Bitcoin. That's just a pretty shiny circle there. The token itself is actually a long, unique identifier that's infeasible to guess or fake. And we actually can associate data inside the PeopleSoft system with that token so that when we can send the token out into the world in an email address or an email link, and when it comes back, we know what unique data like the form ID or personal information, we know what data is associated with that token, even though we never send it out. It's not encrypted in the string or anything. It's you can't derive any data from that link other than following the link and getting to the page that it's pointing to. And in order to keep that from being a door that's always open, we set them to expire so you don't have access to your system sitting around in an email archive someplace. Here's just a view of the setup at Prologis. And you can see that we can both associate code with this, we can associate a target URL with it, and we can tie data to it that will allow it to go through one little door on the public portal and then end up right where you want it to be, looking at your particular transaction. And we are running a little short of time, so I'm actually going to skip ahead a little bit because we'll talk about this a little more here in just a second. The public portal is a key portion of this, and you can look at this deck to get a little bit of information about that. It is PeopleSoft's approach of choice to engaging with external populations, and they deliver applications that use public portals like eRecruit and Talent Acquisition Manager in the HCM suite. It allows you to customize the PeopleSoft URL so that your external participants are actually dealing with a different URL than your internal participants, which is a key to maintaining security and to separating this traffic from your secure traffic.
Yeah, and I'll just add to Paul, right? That was a big point with our leadership and our security teams, that it was its own URL on it. And for us, it's actually on its own web server. And we got lucky because we already had it established because we had the Supplier Portal established. But it was a big point of security for us.
And that's you'll see here. I've included a table of real-world external participant solutions that we've done in just in the last year here. That and Prologis is right there at the top. They have some things in common and some things that are different. Different solutions that we're trying to be accomplished. Most of them use all of them actually use a public portal in some way. Most of them use GT token, although not all. the way that users get in varies. So Prologis, it's a token authenticated guest user. The person, that first person who gets into the eForm from the outside is in as guest, but we know who they are because of the token that we sent them. And they're doing the same thing for faculty onboarding in Princeton's Dean of Faculty. We're doing interesting things here at UC Berkeley. They needed multiple people to sign off on a graduate committee approval who were not in the organization. There, we actually automatically generated a user ID as we sent the form to them that let them get in, but they didn't even need to know their own password. So it was, they're uniquely identified and they're signing the form using their own user ID, but they don't have to know a password in order to get in. We have self-provisioning pages at Hennepin County that people can get to build their own user IDs. We have at Princeton Grad School, we're actually using tokens to do email-based approvals on the form. So approvers can actually say approve this form without ever being inside of PeopleSoft as themselves, without having to sign in. They just hit approve in an email. It pops up a browser window and lets them know that the action was successful, but they never had to see a login page. And yet the transaction happens under their own user ID because, again, we know who we sent the token to. And so, yeah, lots of different approaches here. We're starting with the guest user and then auto switching to an authenticated user ID after we've done a search match. So lots of different ways. We could talk about this a lot more, but we are out of time. So I want to get to your questions and comments and any lavish gushing praise that you may want to shower on us. So Scott, what have you got for us here?
So we've got a question in the queue, and either one of you can respond to this. How does GT eForms work with PeopleSoft upgrades? Do you have to reapply?
Since it is a bolt-on, meaning that it's all new objects that don't share any common names with PeopleSoft objects, the upgrades don't require a reinstallation of GT eForms. The upgrade scripts just won't touch it. It's possible that there will need to be updates to CI logic if the target components that we're updating through the CI have changed in the upgrade. So there is some retesting that needs to happen to make sure that the CIs still work, just like, since the CI is just an automated user, so that's following a script. So if your user script changes, then you have to change the automated user script as well. But other than that, no, there's no impact from upgrades. Thank you.
And I've got another one here for Patrick. What other things are you using eForms for?
So we are using eForms right now for one of the nicer, cool ones we just did was for security requests. So when a user needs to change, either change or get new security access, meaning an employee. So if someone transfers, so it does a pretty cool thing where it brings up a current matrix of all their roles. We say, yes, keep those or don't keep those. And we actually, you can clone from a user. So you can say, you know, make Patrick just like Paul. I don't know why you would say that, but you might say that. And then it pulls up the target user's roles. And then we were actually paying an offshore team to go make those changes. So we use the CI to do the changes automatically on security profiles. So it's faster and it's cheaper for us in the long run. We've also started building them for some of there's certain chart fields that you can do delivered PeopleSoft forms for that have CIs, and then there's certain chart fields that do not. So we're using them for some of our other chart fields, creation and updates. And we're also using them we're getting rid of like a paper form that we used to fill out to make, if you wanted a corporate card to request that, or if you wanted to up your limit temporarily on your card. You know, when we used to travel and you might need to up your limit temporarily to a big trip, you can up your limit using the form. So those are a couple examples. We're pretty new, so we're building more and more and looking forward to getting rid of more paper forms, but those are a couple ones that we're doing now.
Just have to show you, this is what one of those translated emails looks like, and multilingual. This is in Hungarian.
That's impressive.
It's pretty crazy. I had to learn Hungarian in order to do this. So
Yeah,
I feel
the
like
GT team will learn any languages that you ask them to as part of the project. So
right. It's just one of those little extras that we throw in.
Well, gentlemen, I think that we may be out of time.
Very good. We haven't left any questions in the queue.
Not that I see. But if you want to flip to the next slide, there you go. If other questions come up after the session, please feel free to reach out to any of the three of us. You can find our email addresses out there, as well as my phone number and Paul's phone number.
Very good. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Patrick, for helping us out with this. Awesome to reprise our fun times together.
yeah, it was a fun time. We'll say that. So thank you for your help on the solution. It's working out great for us. So happy to present with you.
Very good. And thank you, everyone, for attending the Innovation Summit. This is the last session of the day. So we will hand things back over to, I don't know if it's Scott or Joseph that's waiting for us here. Scott Lavery, thank you so much for hosting us. We appreciate the invitation to present.
Sure thing. Thanks, Paul. And yeah, that's a wrap. Thanks, everyone. Thank you to our friends at Gideon Taylor. We appreciate everybody for your participation. Want to keep everybody aware. We will be sending a survey email out on Friday. We'd love to hear your thoughts about the sessions you attended over the last couple days. And be sure to join our official Slack channel. That's at psftsummit.slack.com. Yeah, a lot of great stuff happening there. So we'll be sure to send a link to that as well when we send out the email. So yeah, until next time, thank you everyone for participating, and it's been fun, and we'll catch you next time. Have a great night.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.